Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop chasing someone, they suddenly become interested in you? It's not magic, and it's not manipulation. It's pure psychology. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, understood something profound about human nature that most people miss entirely. Today, we're diving deep into Jung's revolutionary insights about the human psyche and how understanding these principles can completely transform your relationships with men. This isn't about playing games or being cruel. It's about understanding the psychological forces that drive attraction and connection at the deepest level. Before we continue, if you're ready to unlock the psychological secrets that will change how you approach relationships forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what you're about to learn will shift your entire perspective on dating and human connection. Jung believed that every person carries within them what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. When it comes to relationships, one of the most powerful shadows we carry is our desperation for validation and love. The moment someone senses this desperation, something fascinating happens in their unconscious mind. Think about it this way. When you're constantly available, always responding immediately, always accommodating someone else's schedule, you're unconsciously broadcasting your own insecurity. Jung would say you're projecting your shadow onto the relationship. The other person doesn't consciously think this person is desperate, but their unconscious mind picks up on the energy imbalance immediately. This is where most women make a critical mistake. They believe that showing constant interest and availability demonstrates love and care. But psychologically, it does the opposite. It triggers what Jung called the inflation of the ego in the other person. When someone knows they have you completely figured out, when there's no mystery, no challenge, no psychological tension, their unconscious mind categorizes you as conquered territory. Jung observed that human beings are naturally drawn to what challenges them, what they can't quite grasp, what exists slightly beyond their reach. This isn't about being difficult for the sake of being difficult. It's about maintaining your own psychological integrity and wholeness. The key insight here is that when you learn to ignore someone the right way, you're not being manipulative. You're actually being authentic to your own needs and boundaries. You're refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. This psychological shift creates what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your complete, authentic self, rather than just half of a codependent pair. Now let's explore one of Jung's most fascinating concepts, the anima. According to Jung, every man carries within his unconscious mind an idealized image of the feminine. This is his anima. It's not just about romantic attraction. It's about his relationship with his own inner feminine qualities, intuition, emotion, creativity, and mystery. Here's where it gets incredibly interesting for women. When you're constantly available and predictable, you become what Jung would call too conscious to the man. You lose your connection to the mysterious, intuitive feminine energy that his anima craves. You become safe, known, categorized, and therefore, psychologically speaking, less magnetizing. But when you learn to ignore him the right way, something powerful happens. You reconnect with your own mystery. You become less predictable, less controllable, less figured out. This triggers his anima projection in the most profound way because you're embodying the very qualities his unconscious mind is seeking. Think about the women throughout history who have captivated men completely. Cleopatra, Coco Chanel, Frida Kahlo. What did they all have in common? They were completely absorbed in their own lives, their own passions, their own missions. They didn't ignore men out of spite or manipulation. They ignored them because they had something more important to focus on, themselves. This is crucial to understand. The right way to ignore someone isn't about being cold or cruel. It's about being so genuinely engaged with your own life that you naturally become less available to others. When you're pursuing your dreams, developing your talents, nurturing your friendships, exploring your spirituality. You're not playing hard to get. You are hard to get because your energy is invested in becoming the fullest version of yourself. Jung believed that psychological health came from what he called holding the tension of opposites. In relationships, this means balancing your desire for connection with your need for independence, your care for others with your care for yourself, your openness with your boundaries. When you can hold this tension gracefully, you become psychologically irresistible, the man who experiences you as someone who is genuinely engaged with her own life will find his anima strongly activated. His unconscious mind recognizes that you possess something he lacks, a complete relationship with yourself. This creates what psychologists call approach motivation. He doesn't just want you. He needs to understand you, to figure out what makes you so self-contained and content. Jung understood something that modern psychology has confirmed through countless studies. Human beings assign value based on scarcity and effort required to obtain something. But here's the twist that most people miss. This isn't about artificially creating scarcity through manipulation. It's about becoming genuinely scarce because you're investing your time and energy in becoming an extraordinary person. When you're always available, always accommodating, always putting someone else's needs before your own, you're unconsciously communicating low value, not because you are low value, but because abundance without boundaries creates what economists call market flooding. Jung would describe this as losing touch with your own worth and projecting that lack of self-worth onto others. Before we dive into this, if you're still with me, please comment with the number 1 if these insights are resonating with you. The psychological principle at play here is called the intermittent reinforcement schedule. When rewards come unpredictably and require effort to obtain, they become exponentially more valuable to the receiver. This isn't manipulation. It's how the human brain is wired to function. When you respond immediately to every text, cancel your plans to accommodate his schedule, and make yourself constantly available, you're actually training his brain to take you for granted. But here's the crucial distinction. Healthy scarcity comes from having a rich, full life that naturally creates boundaries. Unhealthy scarcity comes from playing games and withholding affection as a power move. Jung emphasized the importance of authenticity in all psychological development. The goal isn't to pretend you're busy or uninterested. It's to actually become so engaged with your own growth and happiness that you naturally have less time and energy to give away freely. This connects to Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your most authentic, complete self. When you're on this journey, you naturally become more selective about where you invest your energy. You develop what Jung called conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction patterns. Think about it from an energy perspective. Every person has a finite amount of emotional and mental energy each day. When you pour most of that energy into worrying about someone else's feelings, analyzing their behavior, trying to be what you think they want, you're left with very little energy for your own development. This creates what Jung identified as psychological dependency. You need the other person to validate your worth because you're not generating that validation from within. When you learn to ignore someone the right way, you're actually learning to redirect your energy back to yourself. You're saying, my time, attention, and emotional energy are valuable resources, and I'm going to invest them consciously rather than giving them away unconsciously. This shift in energy allocation doesn't just change how others perceive you. It fundamentally changes how you perceive yourself. To truly understand why ignoring a man the right way creates such powerful results, we need to dive into what Jung called the masculine principle and how it operates in the male psyche. Jung identified that the masculine archetype is fundamentally driven by what he termed a directed consciousness, the psychological need to focus, pursue, overcome challenges, and achieve goals. This isn't about stereotyping or limiting anyone based on gender. Jung was describing archetypal energies that exist within all people, regardless of their biological sex. However, he observed that in romantic dynamics, men often embody more of the masculine principle, which means they're psychologically wired to find fulfillment through pursuit and conquest. Here's the fascinating part. When you make yourself too easy to conquer, you're actually depriving him of the psychological satisfaction his masculine principle craves. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how quickly someone loses interest in a video game that's too easy? The same psychological mechanism applies to relationships. When there's no challenge, no mystery to unravel, no goal to work toward, the masculine principle becomes dormant and bored. But when you learn to ignore him the right way, by being genuinely engaged with your own life and goals, you become what Jung would call a worthy opponent for his masculine energy. You're not just sitting there waiting to be chosen. You're actively creating a life so interesting and fulfilling that he has to earn a place in it. This triggers what psychologists call the hunter instinct. But here's the crucial distinction. You're not running away from him like prey. You're moving toward your own goals and dreams, and he has to catch up if he wants to be part of your journey. This completely flips the power dynamic from "please choose me" to "prove you're worthy of my time." Jung believed that healthy relationships required what he called tension of opposites. In this case, it's the tension between his desire to pursue and your refusal to be easily caught. This tension creates psychological electricity. It keeps both parties engaged, growing, and invested in the outcome. When you stop chasing and start focusing on your own development, you activate his competitive instincts in the healthiest possible way. He's no longer competing against other men for your attention. He's competing against your own standards, your own goals, your own vision for your life. This type of competition elevates both parties, all rather than diminishing them. The key insight here is that men don't actually want to win easily. They want to win something worth winning. When you make yourself too available, you're unconsciously communicating that you're not that valuable of a prize. But when you're hard to get because you're genuinely focused on becoming an amazing person, you become the kind of prize that makes victory meaningful. Jung discovered something remarkable about human psychology. We're naturally drawn to people who mirror back to us the qualities we most want to develop in ourselves. When you learn to ignore someone the right way, you're essentially becoming a mirror that reflects their own potential for independence, self-worth, and inner strength. This is where the psychology gets really fascinating. Most people are unconsciously seeking someone who will complete them, fix them, or validate their worth. But Jung argued that psychological health comes from becoming complete within yourself first. When you demonstrate this completeness by being genuinely content with your own company and focused on your own growth, you trigger something powerful in others. The person who's used to getting immediate responses and constant attention suddenly encounters someone who doesn't need their validation to feel valuable. This creates what Jung called psychological projection. They begin to project onto you all the qualities they wish they possessed: self-sufficiency, confidence, inner peace, purpose. Here's where it becomes almost addictive for them. They start to believe that if they can win your attention and approval, they'll somehow absorb these qualities themselves. It's not conscious, but their unconscious mind is essentially thinking, if someone this self-contained and confident chooses me, then I must be valuable too. If you've been following along and finding this content as eye-opening as I hope it is, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're diving even deeper into these psychological principles, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. This is why ignoring someone the right way creates such intense pursuit behavior. You're not just withholding attention, you're demonstrating a quality of being that they desperately want to experience themselves. Every time they don't get an immediate response from you, it reinforces that you have something they lack: the ability to be okay without external validation. Jung observed that people will often pursue most intensely what challenges their current way of being. If someone is used to getting validation easily, they'll become obsessed with the person who doesn't give it freely. If someone is used to being the center of attention, they'll be magnetized by the person who seems completely content without their attention. The mirror effect works because you're reflecting back to them a version of themselves they aspire to become. When you're genuinely happy and fulfilled, whether they're in your life or not, you're showing them what emotional freedom looks like. When you have interesting things to do and people to see beyond them, you're demonstrating what a rich, full life can be. This isn't about being cold or uncaring. It's about being so warm and caring toward yourself that you don't need to seek that warmth from others. The irony is that this self-directed love makes you infinitely more attractive to others because they can sense that you're not trying to take anything from them. You're already whole. Now let's get practical. Jung's psychological insights are powerful, but they're useless unless you know how to apply them in real life. Learning to ignore someone the right way isn't about following a set of rules. It's about fundamentally shifting your relationship with yourself and your own worth. The first principle is what Jung called active rather than reactive living. Instead of structuring your day around when he might text or call, you structure your day around your own goals, interests, and well-being. This means having genuine reasons to be unavailable that have nothing to do with him. You're not pretending to be busy. You actually are busy creating a life you love. Start by identifying what Jung would call your unlived life, the dreams, hobbies, friendships, and experiences you've been putting on hold. Maybe you've always wanted to learn a language, start a creative project, deepen your spiritual practice, or reconnect with old friends. When you begin actively pursuing these neglected parts of yourself, ignoring him becomes natural because you genuinely have better things to do. The second principle is emotional self-regulation. Jung emphasized that psychological maturity meant being able to maintain your emotional equilibrium, regardless of external circumstances. This means not checking your phone obsessively, not analyzing his every word for hidden meanings, and not letting his moods determine your mood. Practice what Jung called holding the tension of not knowing. When he doesn't text back immediately, instead of spiraling into anxiety or creating stories about what it means, simply notice the discomfort and return your attention to your own life. This builds what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to be okay with uncertainty and discomfort. The third principle is authentic boundaries. Jung distinguished between healthy boundaries that protect your energy and manipulative boundaries that punish or control others. Healthy boundaries sound like, I'm not available to hang out tonight because I have plans with friends. Not, I'm busy when you're actually free, but trying to seem unavailable. When you do interact with him, be fully present and genuinely interested, but don't sacrifice your own needs or plans to accommodate his. This creates what Jung called conscious relationship. You're choosing to engage rather than compulsively reacting to his attention. The fourth principle is maintaining your own emotional center. Jung believed that each person needed to develop their own relationship with meaning and purpose. When your sense of worth comes from your own growth, creativity, and contribution to the world, you naturally become less dependent on external validation. Remember, the goal isn't to make him chase you. The goal is to become so genuinely fulfilled and engaged with your own life that whether he chases you or not becomes secondary to your own happiness and growth. Jung believed that all psychological transformation begins with what he called the confrontation with the shadow, facing the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. When it comes to relationships, your shadow might include your fear of being alone, your need for constant validation, or your tendency to abandon yourself for others' approval. The beautiful paradox of learning to ignore someone the right way is that it forces you to confront these shadow aspects and transform them into strengths. Your fear of being alone becomes an appreciation for solitude. Your need for validation becomes self-validation. Your tendency to abandon yourself becomes fierce self-loyalty. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and Jung would warn against expecting it to. He called psychological development the work of a lifetime. But the moment you begin this work, the moment you start investing in your own growth, rather than trying to control someone else's interest, everything begins to shift. Here's what happens psychologically when you make this shift. You stop operating from what Jung called the inferior function, the desperate, needy, anxious part of your psyche that fears abandonment. Instead, you begin operating from what he termed the superior function, your most developed, confident, centered self. When you embody this energy, men don't just chase you because you're playing hard to get. They chase you because you've become genuinely hard to get. You're no longer the woman who drops everything when he calls. You're the woman who has a full, rich life that he might be lucky enough to become part of. The addiction-like behavior you see in men who chase unavailable women isn't really about the woman at all. It's about what she represents. She represents the possibility of becoming someone who doesn't need external validation to feel whole. She represents emotional freedom, inner strength, and authentic confidence. Jung observed that we're most attracted to people who embody the qualities we're trying to develop within ourselves. When you learn to ignore someone the right way, you're not just using a dating strategy. You're becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts healthy, secure partners who are drawn to your strength rather than your neediness. The ultimate goal isn't to manipulate anyone into chasing you. The ultimate goal is to become so genuinely content with yourself that you only accept partners who can match your level of emotional maturity and self-respect. When you reach this place, you don't need to play games or use strategies. Your very presence becomes magnetic because you're radiating authentic confidence and inner peace. Remember, Jung's greatest insight was that we cannot change others. We can only change ourselves. But when we change ourselves at the deepest level, when we do the work of becoming whole and complete within ourselves, we naturally attract different experiences and different people into our lives. The man who will chase you like an addict isn't chasing the you who ignores him. He's chasing the you who has learned to love herself so completely that his attention becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. And that transformation, more than any dating strategy, is what will change your life forever.